Venezuela's embattled president insists he will not step down as protests continue to grow. Nicolas Maduro is being blamed for an unprecedented economic crisis. If he doesn't go, what happens next? And could we be seeing the end of socialism in Venezuela? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Venezuela, fighting and resisting. That's how activists in the capital, Caracas, are describing the past week. It's been almost a week of daily demonstrations, some of which became violent. Protesters say President Maduro is inching towards tyranny and they want him to resign. But Maduro says the opposition is conspiring with foreigners to destabilise the country, an accusation he's made many times before. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Teresa Bow has this report from Caracas.
Another day of protests in Caracas. Again, opposition supporters took to the streets on Monday to protest against the economic crisis and what they say is the dictatorship of leftist President Nicolás Maduro.
We've said it on many opportunities. This is a fight of resistance, and resistance means knowing who will break first. Our will is to continue protesting, or the will of those who repress in the name of dictatorship, to continue complying with their orders. We are not going to stop. We are going to carry on. Whilst the people accompany us in protest, we will be convoking them and mobilizing them. That is why today we return to the streets and our slogan is, no rest.
People in Venezuela have been irritated for months over shortages of basic goods and rampant inflation.
Unfortunately, we have gone out into the streets peacefully many times and we have had no response from the government. This time we've had enough. The people are tired and the people are committed to going out to the streets without fear of the onslaught by the National Guard, by the police, without fear of what is coming.
In the last few weeks, demonstrations have increased once again when the Venezuelan Supreme Court decided to assume the functions of the opposition-led Congress. Although the court quickly reversed its decision, street protests continued. On Friday, Venezuela's comptroller's office banned opposition leader Enrique Capriles from public office for 15 years. It said the ruling was due to administrative irregularities in his role as governor. Capriles is widely seen as the opposition's best hope in the presidential elections scheduled for next year. Most protests have degenerated into confrontations between youths throwing stones and security forces spraying crowds with tear gas. The government says the opposition is doing its best to overthrow the government.
I'm anxious to call for local elections so we show these people who we are. So they end with the roadblocks and violence, and we respond with votes.
On the streets, people think differently. They're demanding a date for local elections and seeking an early presidential vote. They say they won't stop protesting until the government gives in to their demands. Teresa Bow, Al Jazeera.
Well, critics of Maduro's government are calling this unrest the end of Chavismo. That's a reference to Hugo Chavez, Maduro's predecessor and the father of socialism in Venezuela. Chavez and now Maduro have supported grand social welfare programs aimed at reducing poverty and improving education across the country. But that costs money, and whilst Venezuela used to be South America's richest country, its economy took a big hit when oil prices fell 3 years ago. Venezuelans today struggle to afford basic needs like food, housing and medicine. They're leaving the country en masse to Colombia, Brazil and Argentina. And many people have blamed the entire economic and political crisis on socialism. So, a lot to talk about, and let's get right to it. Our guests today are from New York, Vanessa Neumann, the founder and CEO of the political risk consulting firm Asymmetrica. In Caracas, Anatoly Kurmaniev is the Venezuela reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And also in New York, Diego Arria, former Venezuela ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome, all of you. Great to have you with us here on Inside Story. Anatoly, if I could start with you and first get a look at the situation that we're seeing on the ground there in Venezuela. We're seeing this surge in protests. What sense of anger are you getting from the streets?
Well, keep in mind, Laura, that this is Easter week in Venezuela right now, a very big holiday. It's a Christian country, it's a Caribbean country, and traditionally people go to the beach throughout the week. This morning the streets are very calm, very few people in the streets. It looks like a completely normal public holiday. But of course yesterday very serious battles raging between the protesters and security forces in eastern Caracas, in the opposition stronghold of eastern Caracas. Loads of tear gas, even reports of live gunshots being fired. But it's quite contained geographically to one borough of the capital. Most of the country remains very calm this week.
Vanessa, who are we seeing on the streets? Is it the opposition protesting, or are we seeing more ordinary people coming out onto the street, almost because they've reached breaking point?
Well, thank you for having me on. Well, that's exactly what has happened is, you know, originally it was viewed as the opposition was sort of a privileged class, the oligarchy. That's the old narrative that the Chavistas had. What has happened is that with the increasing poverty and an 85% disapproval rating and the average Venezuelan losing 20 pounds, losing more than 9 kilos of weight because of a shortage of food and no jobs, they're instead of standing online for food, that there's no food when they get there, why not protest? So what has happened is the poor have nothing to lose and no place to go, so they might as well join the protest. So it's getting bigger and bigger, and it is clearly no longer just a privileged few. It is absolutely encompassing everyone at this point.
Diego, you mentioned tear gas, you mentioned live rounds. Are you sensing that the authorities are willing to crack down absolutely on protests?
Yes, you know, but if I may add, I believe that since the Organization of American States, its Secretary General Almagro, presented such a strong condemning report about the situation in Venezuela, that the people in Venezuela have been finally encouraged and animated by international solidarity, which we have been lacking for the last 20 years.
But how, I mean, if you were talking about international solidarity, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's look at the reaction, Diego, because there has been a sense of indifference, hasn't there? And why do you think that's now changing? You know, we have suffered indifference for many years. Two factors, mainly when the oil prices were very high, the Chavez regime originally gave away about $90 billion, which was good to buy complicities, supportive new friends, and actually all over Latin America and the Caribbean, and even beyond, even in the United States, they were providing cheap oil to some communities in New York and in Boston. So the oil was used by the regime to actually buy complicities. So suddenly now, we get a new Secretary General at the Organization of American States that produced actually a report condemning the regime, which have actually received major support of about 22, 23 Latin American countries and the international community in general. Vanessa, are you sensing the same sort of feeling, the sort of shift away from supporting Maduro within the region?
Yes, absolutely, because also the other factor that I completely agree with what Diego said, but to add to that, you also have the fact that the Supreme Court staged a coup last week. I mean, the National Assembly is 2/3 controlled by the opposition. They have been increasingly, trying to sideline them. And then basically the Supreme Court just said, we'll take over. Even though they went backwards the next day, the fact of the coup attempt by the Supreme Court, which was motivated by access to money, they wanted to sign deals without congressional approval for oil exploration and loans. So because of that, then people feel that this is actually truly a dictatorship. They were also supposed to have elections back in December. Those were cancelled. The referendum, which was wanted, has been denied. So there is no way you can argue that this is not a dictatorship. Other countries want to back away. They don't want to be seen as backing a dictatorship. And you also have a looming humanitarian crisis. 30 million people are hungry. If they flee and come pouring across the borders to Brazil, Mexico, they're already on life rafts to the Caribbean, to the Netherlands, countries of Curacao and Aruba. Now the EU is involved and other countries are involved. They want to stop this before it comes into their we have, you know, immigration crisis number 2.
Anatoly, Vanessa outlined a number of major flashpoints that have happened over the past year. I mean, that move by the Supreme Court to assume parliamentary powers, how much of a miscalculation was that?
That was a very surprise decision, which of course was the trigger for this crisis, which is arguably becoming the biggest test of Maduro's government in the 4 years. There's a lot of different theories exactly why they did it. It was a very strange timing. As Diego mentioned, the OAS, the Organization of American States, has been raising the pressure on Venezuela these coming weeks. Yeah, it's not quite clear why they took such a drastic step for relatively minor gain of signing oil deals without congressional approvals, which they could have just done it de facto as they've done anything else. There's some theory about infighting within the government. One sort of group of ruling party trying to damage another group. There's even a theory of a mistake. I mean, keep in mind that this decree by the Supreme Court, it was all about oil deals. It was 20,000 words interpreting a pretty minor point about an oil law. And it was only one line at the very end of this 20,000-word ruling saying, and by the way, the Supreme Court is going to take over the Congress. And keep in mind that these judges who wrote this have been appointed by Maduro. Many of them have very basic legal training. You know, Venezuela had a massive exodus of skilled labor professionals over the last few years. So it's even possible that all this has just been a snafu, which has, of course, been spilled into the streets and has been snowballing over the last few days, with the government doubling down on repression, disqualifying key opposition figures from politics. Of course, it's a very volatile situation which the government hopes Easter week will diffuse. Okay,
and Diego, perhaps even more surprising, if we say looking at the Supreme Court situation for a moment, was Maduro's decision very suddenly to reverse it when it proved unpopular. Did you see that coming?
Yes, well, actually what he did with that was reconfirm that there is no independence and autonomy of the Supreme Court of Justice. If you allow me to say something, because I could not agree more with Vanessa and Anatoly's comments, but you know, people will have to ask themselves, how come a country where the regime is rejected by 85%, with an inflation that may reach 1,600%, exploding, how can it stand? You know, Venezuela is a narco-military regime. The president of the Supreme Court has been convicted of committing two murders. The vice president of the country is being accused by the United States of being linked to narco-traffickers. 12 of the main generals in Venezuela are linked to narco-trafficking. So when you mix all those ingredients to explain how a country that is exploding, where there's so much misery, but where they are killing violently 25,000 persons a year, it still stands.
So you're talking about people who are benefiting from the economic misery of Venezuela there, Diego?
You know, actually the numbers decrease. You know, when the oil prices were very high, there were maybe 3 or 4 times more people. Today, the monies that the government has had to import food has been still stolen by many of the military. The military are in charge of buying food overseas, which has become another source of corruption and actually making the people suffer even more.
Let's just take a step back and take a closer look at Nicolas Maduro, the current president of Venezuela. He was a former bus driver and rose to become a union leader before becoming president. Elected to the National Assembly in 2000, he held a number of positions, such as foreign minister and vice president. Maduro narrowly won the election after the death of Chavez in 2013. His opponent, Enrique Capriles, did not recognize the official results, saying the vote was illegitimate. Since Maduro took office, Venezuelans have been protesting the spiraling economic hardships we've been hearing about and what they're calling an erosion of democracy. Vanessa, Maduro's approval ratings are pretty low, 22%. But how much support within the Chavistas, within the ruling party, is there still for this man as president?
Well, there are different factions within the ruling party, which has been well known for some time. I mean, the ruling party is a coalition of parties, right? From, you know, slightly center-left, what was slightly center-left, all the way to radical communist guerrillas, right? So, and it encompasses all of that. And so but the two main factions are sort of the military, who are nationalists, and the ones who are sort of viewed as Cuban puppets. Maduro is viewed as a Cuban puppet, to wit, this yesterday, while you had, you know, Caracas basically, you know, parts of Caracas basically on fire with a sort of back and forth skirmishes, he was in Cuba asking Raúl Castro what to do about it. This angers a lot of people. It's a little bit viewed like in the Middle East, you know, for instance, in Lebanon, they don't appreciate certain types of intrusion of the Syrian or the Iranians.
Sure.
You have the same thing within Venezuela. Certain factions within the Venezuelan government don't appreciate Cuban intrusion, and he's viewed as a puppet. So a lot of people want to get rid of him. The problem is that, and the rumor is that he's been trying to negotiate his exit, but that they won't let him out because they have nobody else with whom to replace him. Everybody else within the regime is more violent, more disliked. You have a bunch of sanctioned drug traffickers, a bunch of sanctioned supporters of terrorism, you know, billionaire thugs. I mean, he's sort of the soft face. If you get rid of the soft face, who else do you put in? I mean, the vice president is even worse.
Well, I was going to ask you about the vice president.
To getting rid of Maduro.
Let's just turn to Anatoly to get an idea of what people think of the vice president, Tariq Assami.
Very powerful man in Venezuela, runs big sections of the economy, has influence within the military. He ran the police forces here for many years. He's been very close to President Maduro for more than a decade. Maduro's son, you know, he's now been given as a sort of a mentor to Mr. Assami. He spends time with him. He goes to meetings with him. Assami, he's seen different from other Chavistas in the sense that he's a very clever man and a very efficient administrator, very ruthless with his opponents, but also knows how to get things done. He's been, of course, accused of narco-trafficking by the U.S., which many people within the ruling party think basically bans him from running for president. You know, in practice, you know, there's no way he can gather enough support to become president of Venezuela now. But still, the key sort of kingmaker in the country. And a lot of people in Venezuela think that he was a key man to try to sort of steer a transition of Venezuela in some sort of agreement with the opposition to create some sort of transitional government of national unity. But with the drug accusations, it's going to be pretty difficult now. Assami now basically has no way out, has to stick with his government because there's no plan B. Okay.
Well, the Constitution states that presidential elections must be held in 2018, next year. Diego, will, first of all, they be held then? And who will be the main contenders, given that Maduro is so unpopular and the opposition leader, Enrique Capriles, has been banned from office for 15 years?
Well, I believe that there is actually not, the present time is not good to talk about elections, because I don't believe we're going to have elections. If the government ever decided to have elections, they will lose. And how to abandon the power in Venezuela is impossible to conceive. We just won the National Assembly by 2/3, like Vanessa said, and it's absolutely meaningless. All the mayors and governors that we have do not have any power. So I really believe, candidly, that unless we remove the whole, it's not Maduro, it's the regime, and to actually refound the republic, we'll never have stability in the country. And we will continue this slow process of consolidation of a regime that will bring not only a disaster to Venezuela, but it's actually a source of instability in the region and a source of major concerns because of the very dangerous links that this regime has with some terrorist groups in different parts of the world, and the role it plays actually in the peace process in Colombia. We are a real threat to stability in the region. Imagine that we are a small Afghanistan with oil, so it actually can be very dangerous. And it's time for the international community beginning to understand how serious the Venezuelan's implications are, not only for us, but for the region in general.
Vanessa, not Venezuela, Vanessa, if not elections, then what do we need to see in Venezuela to enact change? Can it come from within, or can it only come from the outside, as Diego says?
Well, there are a number of scenarios, and what you do in the political risk world, as we do at Asymmetrica, is we construct scenarios and assign probabilities and track the events to see which of these scenarios the probabilities are changing. There are a number of ways to do this. Basically, dialogue is gone. The government doesn't want to dialogue. They won't even come on a TV show with us to talk to us. Never mind and the whole thing with Zapatero in Spain and the Pope was a phenomenal waste of time. Basically, what we need to have now is either a negotiation, which is just almost like you did with the FARC, and it is you're just about to topple over in order to avoid a scenario where basically they crawl the walls of the presidential palace, like happened in 1958 when we got rid of the last military junta, fly him out and avoid, you know, a bloodshed or a massacre. Then you have to say, negotiate, okay, you can leave the country, but we get the money back, et cetera, free the prisoners, and we have elections. And those very concrete terms with very short-term goals. The other scenario is it all collapses, and we get then we get either invaded by the OAS, which actually has the authority to do that. They can use military. They did in the Dominican Republic in 1965, and they may again. The problem is the United States cannot be behind it because it would only trigger a counter-revolution. The people who might want to trigger it are, for instance, Mexico, which is strengthening its regional diplomatic hand, partly because it wants to strengthen its negotiating position with the United States, and also because it wants to play a bigger role regionally, and it has traditionally been a little bit lefty. So to be led by them or other countries like Colombia and Brazil that share borders, you know, that's one scenario. And then the IMF comes in and bails it out, and you privatize everything, and we end up back to the country that we had in 1958 and rebuilding it. None of these scenarios are good, basically. There is no peaceful exit. There is no election, and we're all happy in a year's time. So unfortunately, that's where we are. Those are the things we're looking at.
Okay. And Diego, would you agree with that? And also, if I can just tack another question on to those points, are we seeing an end to socialism in Venezuela? Well,
you know, actually, we never had a real socialism in Venezuela. What we had was a corrupt regime that enriched many of its own leaders at the expense of the Venezuelans. So there was never an ideological debate for the government. Actually, they were just acquiring power to preserve power, to impose the policies, and actually to enrich themselves. That's basically what the summary of what they call socialism of the 21st century.
Anatoly, if everything changed tomorrow, let's try and end on a positive note here. If we got a new leadership in power that's capable of turning everything around, how long would it take to get Venezuela back on track?
It's going to be a while. I wouldn't be as optimistic as Vanessa. You know, if you just bring the IMF and change the government, it just goes back to what it was before. Keep in mind that this government's been in power for 18 years. We have a whole generation of Venezuelans that know nothing but this government. This is a government that has, for many years, taken care of everything in their citizens' life. Free food, free housing, $3 to travel. It's going to be very difficult to tell people, look, you have to work, you have to earn your own money, and you have to make choices through democratic systems.
Okay, I do have a feeling that we'll be revisiting this discussion many times over the coming weeks, months ahead. But today we have run out of time, so thank you very much for joining us, all of our guests today, Vanessa Neumann, Anatoly Kurmaniev and Diego Arria. And thank you too very much for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.